Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo. And you listeners are in for a real treat in this episode, as I have with me today Brian Bartes. Let me see. Best-selling author, professional coach, speaker, and podcast host. And Brian, since I know I won't do your extensive background justice, please tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And first of all, Scott, thanks for having me on the show. I'm a big fan of your show. I love the premise, the variety of topics, and you have a wide variety of interests, and you try to cover them on your show, which I think is terrific. And it's really an honor to be with you today. In terms of my background, and I'll try and make it fairly short, and then we can explore whichever parts of it you'd like to. But I live in Michigan. I'm born and raised in Michigan. Grew up about 100 miles north of Detroit and currently live in the Metro Detroit area. My educational background is in accounting and finance. So I'm one of those guys that has that, I call it the mutant gene, that thinks dotting I's and crossing T's is super important. And so that's been a big part of my professional background. And an interest that I've had, it really developed at a very young age, was in goal setting. I'm a big goal setter and have been for almost as long as I can remember. And I sort of can identify some specific points in my early childhood that really promoted that and caused me to start goal setting, to see the results that created. And so that grew into more of a general interest in personal development, in professional development, and in the study of success and excellence. And so with that background, I had been setting goals throughout my life, seeing the results that were achieved through setting goals and planning for the achievement of goals, and then taking action to accomplish those goals. And so I saw success in my own life. And at some point I realized that what I was learning and what I was doing wasn't just something that was intended for me to apply in my own life, but that it was something that was really meant to be shared with others on some level. And so that's when I got into coaching, into writing and speaking, and eventually into podcasting. So you and I share that. We talked a little before the show about some of our common interests, and that's sort of certainly one of them. And so that's kind of taken me to where I am today. And really my goal in life is pretty simple. It's to value others and add value to them. And I hope that in our conversation today that we can add value to your listeners.
I appreciate that, Brian. Thank you. And given your background, one question immediately comes to mind. How did you dovetail from what you set out to do into what you're currently doing now?
Yeah, it's actually been concurrent. So I'm doing all of those things, and my personal philosophy is life excellence. And to me, that means excellence in every area of life. And I try to, I'm a big proponent of dreaming big dreams. I think in our society a little bit today, we're squelching that in some cases, but also making it okay or normalizing playing small. And that's fine for people who want to do that. But I believe that we're designed for so much more. And so I'm a proponent of dreaming big dreams. And part of that is wanting to do it all. And certainly there are limits to human capacity, and I constantly butt up against that. But I really try to do the things that I know I need to do to be successful, and also try to add value as much as I can in a variety of different ways. And so what that means is doing a bunch of things, and but all of it's under the umbrella again of adding value to people. And in growing myself, adding value to those in my close sphere of influence, starting with my family or children, and then beyond that through forums like what we're doing now, through podcasts and also through writing and speaking.
Thank you, Brian, for that. Now, in doing some research prior to this podcast, I was first amazed as to your accomplishments, but more I came to learn that you're all about, well, excellence. So if you can, how do you define excellence? And more importantly, can you define life excellence?
Sure. Excellence for me is waking up every day and doing things that nobody sees that result in me creating the life that I want to create for myself, and also helping others to do that. I think when most people think about excellence, they think about the prize. So they think about Olympic athletes on the podium receiving the gold medal, or a New York Times bestselling author getting that status, that notoriety, maybe a Pulitzer Prize, or again, the New York Times bestseller accolade, or a certain balance in your bank account. But to me, that's not excellence. What excellence is to me is all the work that no one sees that Olympic athlete did over the 4 years that led up to standing on the podium and receiving the medal, or the work that the writer did for certainly for months, probably for years leading up to receiving a Pulitzer Prize or achieving New York Times bestseller status, or all the work that somebody did to achieve that so-called overnight success. It's not glamorous, which is why I think most people don't think about that as being excellence. If people saw what I characterize as excellence, a couple things. One, they wouldn't be super impressed with it because it's boring. And secondly, they would have a hard time seeing that activity and the connection between that activity and the result. So again, the standing on the Olympic podium, there's just a disconnect there. But in fact, that's really what excellence is. And so what I try to do is get up every day and do the things that I know will eventually create the results that I want to achieve. And by the way, most of those things are things that people don't see. The reading that I do in the morning, or the workout that I do almost every day, or the things that I put into my mouth because I'm super healthy, or again, we could go through each area of life and I could give you examples of that.
That's amazing, Brian. I feel like a lot of people, including myself, don't think about that all that often, simply because many people don't really consider how the sausage is made, right?
That's right. They don't think about how the sausage is made. And the other thing that I've discovered, and again, this is a choice, it's not judgment, it's totally okay. But so I'll give you an example. I have a few friends who are prolific authors. They've written 60 books, 80 books, 100 books, 200 books. And the thing they talk about most related to people coming up to them is people come up to them and they say, I want to write a book. Tell me, what do I want to be like you. And the advice that all of them give is, if you want to write a book, then what you need to do starting right now is sit down and write, right? It's not rocket science. And again, that's that mundanity, that's the boredom, the thing that nobody sees. It's that they don't see people getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 in the morning and writing. When I wrote, I've written a few books, and when I wrote life lessons, our kids were young, and I literally got up at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, depending on the day. And that was my writing time. So a couple hours in the morning before anybody was awake, before the world was awake. And then I went on and did everything else. And so people don't see that. And the other thing is that, so again, getting back to my friends who are authors, one of them said, you want what I've achieved, but you don't want to do what it takes to achieve what I've achieved. So we want the excellence or our vision of excellence, but we don't really want to do the work that's needed in order to achieve that excellence. And we could go through examples in any field. I've lots of friends. I've interviewed people on my podcast, and it's a common theme that runs throughout excellence, is that there's so much that went on behind the scenes that people aren't either, they're probably not aware of, certainly not, don't have full appreciation for what it took to accomplish what they later see as excellence, right? The prize. And the second thing is, most people, if they knew what it took, they actually don't even get so far as to exploring that. But if they knew what it took to achieve that level of excellence, then they would sort of move on and go pursue something else, because they're not willing to do what it takes to achieve that. Excellence it's not difficult conceptually. So goal achievement is not difficult conceptually. The difficult part is actually doing it, right? It's taking the action, and there's more to it. So what happens when you take action and you run into an obstacle, and how do you react to that? Do you keep going? Do you go over it or under it or around it or through it and keep going like an ant keeps going when water's poured on it? Or do you just stop and get disillusioned and decide that that's not something that you really want to pursue? But again, conceptually, it's actually fairly simple. The mechanics of success, the mechanics of achievement, the mechanics of excellence are actually pretty simple and easy to understand. Not easy to apply, because we're humans, and so we get caught up in all the things that get in our way of trying to achieve what it is that we're the results that we want to create.
Great insight, Brian. I think in listening to your perspective on excellence, two words come to mind, especially when you discuss all the effort behind trying to be excellent. The first is discipline. And in doing some research on you, I've come to learn you're a sports fan, as myself. And in coaching sports over the years, one thing I've always tried to instill was, no matter what you do it with purpose. So that idea surrounding discipline and purpose, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on those two words specifically.
Well, I think discipline is essential, because discipline is the thing that causes you to keep going even when you don't want to. So that's one of the differences between successful people and people who don't end up achieving their desired results, is people with discipline, people with purpose, to use both your words, do what they know they need to do in order to be successful. And this is the important part, whether they feel like it or not. They get up every day, and this plays into habits, but the discipline is what creates the habits. And again, we don't always feel like doing what it is that we know we need to do to be successful. But the super high achievers, the people I've interviewed on my podcast, Life Excellence, people I've run into in life in a variety of different fields, the one thing they have in common is that discipline, that they do what it takes to be successful, even on days that they don't feel like doing it. And I'm just going to add another word to the mix. So you talked about discipline, you talked about purpose. Intentionality is also a key part of that too. And it's all related, and it's probably, if we had a Venn diagram, there'd be overlap between all three of those, considerable overlap. To me, the key is intentionality. And so it's being intentional in making the decision about how it is that you're going to live your life. So not just the achievement of a goal, because again, I talked about life excellence, constant and never-ending improvement in every area of life. And that's absolutely about intentionality. If you're not intentional about creating the results that you want to achieve, then you're just leaving it to chance. And you know that when we leave things to chance, there's a strong likelihood that things aren't going to turn out the way we want them to. If, on the other hand, we're intentional, and if we're disciplined, and if we have purpose behind what we're doing, then we're far more likely to achieve the results that we're looking to create.
Thank you, Brian. For somebody that's so focused on the subject of excellence, I was surprised to hear from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've stated that excellence can be boring.
Well, excellence is boring. It's interesting. And I started studying that concept. I had not thought about it in those terms. Probably none of your listeners, I'd be very surprised if somebody contacted you and said, oh yeah, I've talked about excellence being boring for a long time. But I actually read a journal article, and it was, the title was The Mundanity of Excellence. It's a really great read, and it studied college and elite swimmers and explored this concept of mundanity, of something being mundane, or to use a more common word, boring. And it really is. And it goes back to what I was saying before, the work that nobody sees. And so I'll just give you an example, because excellence is really, it's the repetitive work, and it isn't exciting. It's not glamorous. It's not standing on the podium again. It's those 4 years of effort that it took to get to the podium. It's the daily grind. It's the small actions repeated over time, and the long-term commitment, the discipline that you talked about, the purpose, the intentionality. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, his name is Peter Vanderkay, and I don't know if that name's familiar to you. Pete was a 4-time Olympic medalist in 3 Olympic Games, 3 consecutive Olympic Games, 2004 in Athens, 2008 in Beijing, and 2012 in London. And imagine, Scott, if I called you one day and I said, hey, Scott, I have a super exciting opportunity for you. I have a friend, Pete Vanderkay, who's an Olympic swimmer, and he invited me to go watch him train for the Olympics, and said I could bring one friend. And so I thought of you, and would you like to go and watch him train, to see how an Olympian trains and prepares for the Olympics? And if you're like me, you said you're a sports guy, that's probably pretty exciting, right? It would be exciting if somebody called me with such an offer. Sure. And so I pick you up one day, and we drive, and we go to the pool, and we walk up to the pool. And as we're walking up, Scott, we see there's just one person in the pool, and it's Pete. And Pete's a tall guy. He's, I don't know, 6'4", 6'5", really wide wingspan. Not quite as wide as Michael Phelps, but he's a 3-time Olympian. And so your eyes get big, and I'm smiling as we walk up, and we sit down and we watch Pete swimming. And we see him swim from one end of the pool to the other end of the pool. And then he does one of those fancy flip turns that I've tried to do a few times, and it never went well. But he does it really gracefully. And so then and we're smiling, and your eyes are still big, and he swims from that end of the pool back to the other end of the pool. And then he does a flip turn. And guess what he does after that? He swims from one end of the pool to the other end of the pool. And we watch that. And the interesting thing is, after about 5 minutes of that, and we've seen the same thing over and over and over and over again, and it's not super exciting. It's really exciting when we're watching the race at the Olympics, right? Because the crowd's there, screaming and the announcers are announcing it, and we see the flags on the bottom of the pool representing the countries that each of the swimmer represents. But in this particular pool in training, we're just watching Pete swim from one end of the pool to the other, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And if we stayed for the whole training session, we'd be there hours and we'd be watching the same thing. Now, does that sound as exciting to you as when I first called you and talked about the opportunity to watch an Olympian train?
No, but you sold it pretty well.
Right? Of course. And so that's what happens. We have this picture of how glamorous excellence is, but it really isn't glamorous. And in fact, it's boring. And as I said earlier, we talked about it. If people saw what went into Pete standing on the Olympic podium 4 times, he has 1 gold medal. He swam with Michael Phelps and a couple others in setting the Olympic record in the 4x200 relay. And he has a silver medal and a couple of bronze medals. And if people saw what it took to do that, they wouldn't link the two. So you wouldn't expect that swimming back and forth to result in an Olympic gold medal or an Olympic silver or bronze medal. And the other thing is that even if we were swimmers, and I'm not a big swimmer, but even if we were, you and I would probably not make the decision to do what Pete did. By the way, not for 4 years, but he did it for 13 years. Wow. Through 3 Olympic Games. And that's not, the work isn't exciting. Now, the result is the medals are exciting. But for people who achieve excellence, the work is actually the exciting part, because they know that Pete knew that what he did in the pool every day determined how he would do at the Olympic Games.
Pertaining to that, Brian, in coaching others, what do you find are consistent challenges that people face when they work with you?
There are a couple challenges. In the beginning, it's figuring out how to get from A to B. So how do I get from where I am today to where I want to be? And that's the plan. And some people aren't even quite sure where they want to be. So that's actually a step even before creating the plan. So in coaching, what we do is, and my approach is a holistic approach, because again, it's about life excellence. So we might not focus on faith, for example, or we might not focus on relationships, because most of my clients come to me looking to achieve greater success in their career or in their business growth, personal growth. But we always, I insist that we look at all those areas, because I think they're all related. And if we're having, it's sort of like a rotten part of the fruit. If there's a part of the apple that's rotted, then over time that's going to cause the entire apple to rot. And so all those areas of life are related, and we look at those in the beginning of the coaching process at least. And so we determine where it is that my clients want to go, where they are now, and taking a look at that. How are things going now, and what does that look like? And then figuring out where they want to be, and then we bridge the gap. We develop that plan. And so all of those are obstacles, and in varying degrees with different coaching clients. And then once we get into the work, the hard part is actually doing the work, right? It's the action. So I'm guessing that you know that there are things that you should be doing in order to improve the quality of your life, and you don't have to say what those areas are or what those things are, but I'm guessing you have things that you know you need to do, and yet you're not doing them. And I'm not calling you out, because I do the same thing, and everybody does the same thing, because we're humans. And so that's a huge obstacle. And that's actually one of the biggest benefits of coaching, is the accountability structure. And so I don't allow that. I don't have tolerance for evaluating where we are now, figuring out where we want to be, going through all the work of developing the plan to get from where we are to where we want to be, and then not doing anything about it. That the key is action. A friend of mine, Brian Tracy, he's a little bit older now. He's 80 years old, but he is one of the greats of personal development, an author, speaker. And he had a phrase that I love and always think about called action now. Do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now. And he even suggests waking up and looking in the mirror and saying that to yourself as an affirmation. Do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now. And the reason that's so important to him is because he knows that action is the key to success. There are lots of ingredients that go into it. And I've often been asked, what's the key to success? What's the one thing? And you and I both know, Scott, that it isn't one thing. It's a whole bunch of things. But if I were pinned down, if I absolutely just had to say one thing, it would be action. Because you can have the best plan. You can have a solid plan that, if followed, would absolutely, with 100% certainty, get you from where you are to where you want to be. But if you don't take action, then you're not going to achieve that desired result, right?
Absolutely. Great advice. And one thing I find is a constant driver is competition. That's what a lot of us thrive on, whether it's in business or sports. And one thing I've always kept in mind, whether it's playing sports since high school or on into the business world now, is that my competition is out there doing something right now. They're either on the field doing drills, or in the business world, they're out there hustling. And that's always been a motivating factor for me. And again, doing research on your background, you touch on it a lot in your overall message. You describe building bridges. Can you add some insight on what such a bridge would look like?
Sure. The bridge is the plan. So it's, again, many people don't know, and it's not their fault, but they haven't really thought about it. So I'm a very contemplative person, very thoughtful person, very intentional person. And I'm also constantly evaluating, constantly analyzing. It goes back. So one of my strengths, I don't know if you're familiar with StrengthsFinder, but my strengths are learner, achiever, and analytical. So you put all those things together, and I need to do something every day. It could be a small thing, it could be a big thing, but I need to check a box, and that's achiever. Learning is I'm always, we have a phrase in our house, always learning, always growing. Our kids know that. And so I'm always learning, always reading, always listening to podcasts, attending seminars, reading books. And analytical is another part of it. So I'm always analyzing. I'm always looking at how are things going, and how does that compare to how I want them to be going, and what do I need to do? How do I need to adjust? So it's a little bit like, you've probably heard that about the metaphor of a plane. And a plane is never 100% on course, right? It's on course for a second, then it's off course, and then it adjusts, and then it's off course again, and then it adjusts. And so it's this constant calibration or recalibration. And that's what I do in my life. And so that bridge is the plan. It's the connection between where you are and where you want to be. And it's the series of steps. It's what do you need to do? What action do you need to take to get you from where you are to where you want to be, so that you achieve your goals, so that you achieve your desired results? And that's goal setting in and of itself is something that most people don't do. I've read research tells us that only about 3% of people in the world have written goals. I actually think that it's much smaller than that. And only 1% of the population reviews those goals on a regular basis. And I actually think that that's much smaller too. So if most of us, if 97% of us don't have written goals, then we certainly don't have plans for the achievement of those goals. The interesting thing is that just in the setting of those goals, so I'll just give some advice. If you don't do anything else, for those listening to the show, create a set of written goals. And one thing that you can do, you can either, lots of ways that you can do it. You can just take a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have an app. You don't have to have a computer. Just take out a sheet of paper and write down everything that you want to accomplish in the next 10 years. Just do a brainstorming or a mindstorming exercise. Another thing that you can do, and this is especially helpful if you really want to get focused on what your goals are, every day, take out a sheet of paper when you get up in the morning and write down your top 10 goals that you want to achieve in the next 12 months. Just write them down. Don't judge them. Don't think about it. Just rapid fire. What are the things that come to mind? And maybe in the beginning, it takes a minute to, oh, geez, I have 7 or I have 8. I can't get to 10. Just get to 10 and do that for 30 days. And don't ever go back and look at what you've written in the previous days. And so what happens through that process, and we won't get into the detailed explanation, but what happens is your most important goals rise to the top. And so after 30 days, you can keep doing it for as long as you want because it's reinforcing what those goals are. But your most important goals rise to the top. And so by the 30th day, your first 3 goals, your first 5 goals, those are going to be the goals that are most important to you. Now, the interesting thing, and the reason I bring it up, is because if that's all you do, and then after 30 days, you don't do anything else, just take that 30th day, that list, and just put it in an envelope and write down the date and stick it in a drawer. And then a year from now, pull that out. And what will be very interesting is the goals that got accomplished through no conscientious relationship between the goal setting exercise and the accomplishment of those goals. So we didn't create the bridge, Scott. We didn't create the plan. We didn't do anything. It was interesting. Just about a week ago, a friend of mine shared that very example. She said, I like writing goals down, but I don't do any of the bridge stuff. I don't create a bridge. I don't write a plan. I just, at the beginning of every quarter, I write down what my goals are for the quarter. And at the beginning of every year, I write down what my goals are, and I don't do anything else. And she said, the funniest thing happens, though. I pull out that sheet of paper because I keep it. And at the end of the quarter, I pull out the sheet of paper, and it's amazing to me the goals that got achieved. And I didn't even give it another thought after I wrote it down. And it's amazing to me at the end of the year, the goals that got achieved. And I didn't even think about those goals that I wrote down at the beginning of the year. And that's the power of goal setting. And so when you add to it the bridge between where you are today and where you want to be, what you need to do to actually achieve those goals, the step-by-step actions. Who do you need to bring into your life? Who do you need to meet? Who do you need to contact? Who do you need to hire? Who do you need to start working with? Who do you need to partner with? What do you need to do every day? What's that boring, mundane work like what Pete did in the pool every day for 13 years? What's that work that you need to do to accomplish your goals? If you do that, then it becomes like a hot knife through butter, the achievement of all your goals, no matter how big they are.
I love the analogy of the airplane, Brian. And turning back on the subject of coaching, it seems like post-pandemic, there's a lot of career rut and burnout. Are you seeing this yourself? And what sort of advice would you give those surrounding that subject?
Well, I think there are a lot of things going on in the world post-pandemic, and I think a broader issue. This is related. It's going off on a little bit of a tangent, but the loneliness epidemic. And what happened in the pandemic is people were isolated. And so some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. And I think for the introverts, especially, it caused them to become even more isolated. For extroverts, it caused them to be isolated. And this loneliness epidemic, by the way, isn't something that started with the pandemic. It's something that started a long time ago. There's a gentleman, a researcher, wrote a book called Bowling Alone. I don't know if you've heard about that book. It's been around, I think, about 20 years, and it explores community and life in the really sort of the mid 1950s, the middle of the 20th century, and how that compares to life today. And so in the 50s, we were very community oriented. There were organizations like the Elks and the Kiwanis and the JCs, and there was really this sense of belonging and bowling. It was the height of bowling, right? And so he pulls the title from that notion of people were together on bowling teams. They were on softball teams and baseball teams. And interestingly, related to bowling specifically, there are more bowlers than ever, but there are fewer bowling leagues than ever. So it's this sort of paradox. And he studies how that has caused social isolation and the impact of that, which ultimately is loneliness. A couple of years ago, the Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic and said that half the population is suffering from health and medical and mental and emotional impacts related to isolation. And so that's a huge challenge. And I don't know exactly how that fits into burnout. I think burnout is something a little different. There is a dynamic going on actually right now with where the economy is going, just right at this time with our country obviously cutting back and trying to become more efficient and pare down numbers of people. And companies are doing that too. A friend of mine was just separated from her position after 25 years of being with the company, 25 years of dedicated service to her company. And it was just the result of a number that started with a dollar figure and then that was put into a headcount figure, which in her case was 8,000, very, very large company. And they just cut out 8,000 people. And there really isn't, when mass layoffs or mass changes like that happen, there isn't a lot of analysis about who those people are going to be or the value that they add to the company or the value they add to their colleagues. And so when you put all those dynamics together, Scott, and there are obviously other ones, if a company is cutting workforce, they're not hiring people to replace those functions. And so what happens is the people who are in positions around them are required to take on additional responsibility, right? I mean, some of that gets absorbed through maybe AI absorbs some of it or robots absorb some of it. But usually what happens is the boss or the manager comes and says, hey, there were three people in your department. The good news for you is that you're not going to be one of the two who are no longer with our company. The other part of it, though, is that you're now going to be required to do not just your job, which took up probably the vast majority of allotted time that you had for your job, but you need to cover those other two people because we're not hiring a replacement. And so that's where burnout comes in. And there's a lot of disillusionment around commitment by companies, commitment by employers. It could be, it's not just companies, it could be nonprofit organizations, it could be government organizations, but disillusionment around commitment of those organizations to their workers. And so that contributes to all of that. It contributes to stress, contributes to burnout, contributes to dissatisfaction with where people are. And it's probably another epidemic, just like the loneliness epidemic. And there again, there's probably a little bit of overlap between those two.
Agreed. And I'm seeing that now, especially in my field, in the example you give. Again, getting back to the coaching part of it, I have to ask, what is some of the best advice you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So everything that we've talked about and everything that I do to grow personally, to grow professionally, to help others to grow personally and professionally, all of that has come from the collective advice, either advice or coaching that I've received, or it's not an either or, it's an and. The advice and coaching I've received and my collective experience through learning and trying things and having a lot of things not work and some things work. Goal setting to me is really at the core of creating and living your best life. And it goes back, I think, to really intentionality. And so I don't know if it's advice or if it's things that I've learned and come around to again through my collective experience. But I don't take any of the credit myself, because it's all through learned either advice, conversations, interviews, reading, attending seminars, talking to people, and trying things. But I think really being so for me, it really comes down to a couple basic things. One is that I really try to value people and add value to them every day of my life. And I think if we all valued people, and you know that today we live in a society where unfortunately we don't value people all the time. In fact, in a lot of cases, what we're doing is based on somebody's opinion about something going on in the world, we either value them or devalue them. And if we could get back to valuing people, to really honoring human beings and every human being, the Dalai Lama said that every human being on the planet has the same right to happiness. And so if we start by valuing people, and then secondly, if we all tried to add value to people, and I would love, Scott, for that to happen in really big ways. I don't think I have a big ego, but we all want to make a difference, and we always think about big ways to make a difference, right? And it goes back to that dream big dreams. And if that happens, if that's part of my calling, if that's part of, for me, I'm a man of faith. And so if that's part of God's plan for my life, then that's wonderful. And I'll step into that gladly. But one thing I do know is that every one of us has the opportunity to add value to people in small transactional ways every single day. We all bump into people. We bump into people on the side, walking down the sidewalk. We bump into people walking into our office buildings. We bump into people at the gym or at clubs that we belong to, or at the grocery store or the mall. And every person we come across, every person we have the opportunity to interact with, even transactionally, is a human being. And we have no idea what's going on in that person's life. And my goal for every single transaction with every single person that I encounter is to add value to them. And I'm not going to say I do that all the time. I probably fall short in my effort to do that a lot of the time. But I that's my goal. I really want to do that. And so we can do that by being kind to people, right? So, things don't always go the way we want them to go. And that's frustrating. And it's especially frustrating in the world today. And sometimes we have the opportunity to vent with other people who maybe they've contributed to that frustration, but maybe they're just the person we're encountering as we're feeling that frustration. And how we navigate through that transaction, through that interaction, through that conversation is always a choice. No matter what we're going through, we always have a choice about how we're going to navigate through that, about how we're going to, whether we're going to value a person or devalue them, whether we're going to attempt to add value to them or have them bear the brunt of the frustration or the anger or the sadness or whatever feeling we're feeling. And I think if we all approach that a little bit differently, well, not I think, I know that if we all approach that a little bit differently, and even some of the time did better than how we do now. And again, I'm not pointing fingers because I look at myself in the mirror and I know how I've navigated through some of those conversations. But I think if we all try to be kind in a world that is changing, and when I say changing, it's like all capitals and a really large font. The world is changing faster than ever before. It's impacting us more than ever before in multiple ways, right? We're being hit from a lot of different directions, and we're all being impacted by that. And I think if we recognize that we're all being impacted by that I'm not the only one being impacted by that, the person on the other side of the conversation is also being impacted by that. And if we can take that into account and maybe just treat them a little bit differently, then the world would be a better place because of it.
I really appreciate those words, Brian. I also very much appreciate you putting your faith out there as well. As a man of faith myself, I do believe that iron sharpens iron, and that's certainly a great way to live.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's move on to your podcast. You, like myself, are a podcaster, and I'm curious to learn, now that you have many episodes under your belt, what have you learned along the way? And not that you can pick your favorite child, because we can't do that, but what are some of your favorite episodes, and what should my listeners be focusing on?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you mentioning the podcast. It's called Life Excellence, and we've done about 80 episodes. So I'm definitely still learning, always growing, right? So I'm learning something all the time. And yet I feel probably like you do, Scott, that you have flow to the show. What I love most about the show, and just to give your listeners a little bit of background, and you would probably expect this just from the title of the show, but I interview people who have achieved excellence in their chosen profession. And I do it not just so people are entertained, but what I try to do is uncover the tools and techniques and strategies that caused each of our guests to be successful, to achieve excellence in whatever their profession is, so that our listeners and viewers, so we're available on all podcast platforms as well as visually on YouTube. We have the video edition of the show. And what I want ultimately is that our listeners and viewers are able to take some of those nuggets and apply them into their own life. And one of the things that I love best about the show, I'm inspired, by the way, by every single guest, and we've done about 80 shows now, as I said. And what I really like and what I strive to do is So we've talked about a couple examples of excellence, about Pete Vanderkay, the Olympic athlete, and he was actually the second guest on my show, and I was honored to have him. He was so gracious to do it at a time when I didn't know what I was doing. Certainly, he did, thankfully, and the show turned out pretty good because of it. But when we think of excellence, we often think about sports and things that we see in the world, in the media. But what I try to do is uncover excellence in ways that people don't think of, and vocations that people don't think of. And I will tell you that every single one of our guests has achieved excellence in his or her chosen profession. And I've had the pleasure and the honor of interviewing a NASA astronaut, last year's Miss America, comedian Jeff Foxworthy, Horst Schulze, who's the founder of the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain you might be familiar with, world champions in a variety of fields, from squash to chess to Irish dance, an ultra marathoner, several prolific authors, probably the most successful audiobook narrator. That's one of the coolest examples of, when you think of excellence, Scott, you're probably not thinking about audiobook narration as being a manifestation of excellence. But I will tell you, it was one of my favorite shows. And Julia Whalen is her name. She's very, very well known for people who listen to nonfiction books, especially. And she's absolutely phenomenal as an audiobook narrator. She narrates, if a book has 5 different characters, men and women, old and young, she narrates all of those parts and does it consecutively. So she doesn't narrate the 70-year-old man's pieces and then go back and does the 15-year-old teenage girl's pieces. She does it sequentially, just as they appear in the book. And she actually did it on the podcast. It's really, it's so fun to watch, and just such a great manifestation of excellence. And I even had the pleasure of interviewing America's first American master sommelier, Eddie Osterland, who back in 1973 earned, if you're a wine drinker, or if anybody listening to the show is, you know what a master sommelier is. It's the highest level of accreditation in the art of wine knowledge. And so all of those shows have been great. And I could go through and list the rest of the 80 shows and talk about each person, and they're all extremely impressive. In terms of a favorite, I'm impressed by all of them. Asking me to pick a favorite would be like me asking you to tell me who your favorite child is, Scott. I know you have 3 kids. And of course, we don't have favorites. And I have, 80 kids on the show. I will share, there are some that stand out, and I'll share just one of them. One guest that really stands out for her incredible courage is Laura Decker. Laura's Dutch, born in the Netherlands. And at the age of 14, she set off from Gibraltar in a 40-foot boat called the Guppy. Now, Laura grew up. She was actually conceived on a boat by her parents, who were sailing around the world, and sailed her entire life. And so 14 seems very young, but she had been sailing literally for 14 years, much of it on her own, since the age of 3. That said, she took off from Gibraltar and was gone for about a year and 5 months, 519 days. And Laura sailed all the way around the world by herself, becoming the youngest person ever to do so. And it was just, and Laura's still a young person, and absolutely just so amazing and incredibly impressive. And you think about the knowledge that she had to have to, as a 14-year-old, to sail around the world by herself. She was 16 when she finished. Again, it took about a year and a half. And she's just such an inspiration. And what stories like that, so it's great, right? That's an entertaining, feel-good story, and all of your listeners would really enjoy hearing her show. But the takeaway isn't what Laura did. It's imagine if a 14-year-old girl can muster that kind of courage and that kind of wherewithal and that kind of fortitude to sail all the way around the world herself. What can each of us accomplish? And that's really the takeaway that I try to leave our listeners with after every show. And not all of them are that dramatic in terms of accomplishment, but we have a lot of goats, people who are just literally the best at what they do, the best ever of anybody who's ever done what they do. And for me, it's super inspiring. And that's why I do the show. I do the show because it inspires me, with the hope that it also inspires our audience, in that they, again, can glean those tools and techniques and strategies, and not go and get in a boat and sail around the world, but whatever they do, that they do it to the best of their ability, that they do it with excellence, inspired by some of the stories that they get to hear on the show.
Wow. Thanks for that, Brian. And that is an incredible story. And I can tell my listeners, as I've stated before, I've listened to a few of your Life Excellence podcast episodes, and I can guarantee you that the listeners will take away something from each and every episode and apply it to their life walk. And I think that's a great legacy that you are laying down throughout your podcast.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And again, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it a little bit on your show.
Absolutely. So, Brian, you've written several books, which seems amazing to me. Life Excellence, Treasury of Quotes, and Life Lessons, and Peace of Mind for You and Your Loved Ones, to name a few, which in and of itself is an impressive feat. Can you describe what my listeners will learn from these books?
Sure. The first book that I wrote was called, and it's actually, I say wrote, and I'll qualify that a little bit. And actually I'll say put together 4 books, and I'll describe very quickly what that means for each of them. The first book, Peace of Mind for You and Your Loved Ones, the complete guide to organizing your estate, came out of a period in my life, Scott, where we had about 7 or 8 people pass away in a 14-month period of time. And some of those were expected, grandparents, but a couple of them were in their 40s. And one had my wife's best friend died of breast cancer. And a friend of mine had a heart attack and died suddenly. One day he was here, the next day he wasn't. One was an 11-year-old friend of my sons, who was 11 at the time. And I've always been a planner, and thinking about today and thinking about 20 years from now. And one of those people was my father-in-law, and I remember going through his office and the file cabinets in his office, which paperwork had accumulated for probably about 40 years. And I was trying to find things that were relevant, and most of them weren't. And when I say relevant, like we don't even know if he had life insurance. And so trying to find that needle in a haystack. And so Peace of Mind is, I call it and all of our kids know where my book is. My wife has known where my copy is for a long time. And it's the place where if I don't come back from my next trip, or if I don't come back from the grocery store, it's where you can go to learn everything you need to know to get through. So it's interesting when a loved one passes away, and it's a little timely because my father actually passed away 2 weeks ago. And so this is that book is very fresh for me because I've been going through his copy of Peace of Mind and it's made it much easier to do things that are very difficult to do, at a time when people are grieving. And the last thing they want to do is some of those practical estate planning things and figuring out what did he owe and what did he own and what does he have and what needs to be done and who do we need to contact and how does he want his funeral service to be. And so that book, Peace of Mind, addresses that. The next book that I wrote several years later was Treasury of Quotes was the next book. And that was it's a collection of quotes. So I put that together. I didn't write it. I'm a quote junkie, and I historically, prior to that point, Scott, I had envelopes full of quotes that I had cut out of newspapers and magazines and torn and written down on Post-it notes and scraps of paper. And I had this stuff all over the place. And I actually had an Excel spreadsheet that had different quotes. And I thought, something needs to change here. I need to be a little more intentional. And so I created a beautiful book called Life Excellence Treasury of Quotes. It's a collection of my favorite quotes. It's a kind of a coffee table book. It's a beautiful gold foil cover. And if you take the dust jacket off, it's a black kind of leatherette with gold foil print and very well put together. And I was doing it because I wanted to self-publish a book. And that was sort of my trial run for the actual publishing process. And then a year later, I published a book that I had been writing called Life Lessons, that you mentioned, A Guide to Creating Your Best Life. And that was a book that I wanted to write for my own children, first of all, because I had the thought, again, through some experience of people not being around, that, geez, what if I wasn't around to be able to teach these lessons? And thankfully, I've been around long enough that our kids know all the lessons. They could all show up on podcasts like yours and talk about any one of the 14 lessons ad nauseum. But it's a book that it's not just for kids, although a lot of the book is gifts for high school graduates and college graduates. It's really, it's a great gift for that time in life for people. But it's really, it's for anybody who wants to create and live their best life. And it's, again, 14. I'm not going to say it's all the lessons in life, but it's 14 of the most important ones. And as I look at the list today, there's still the 14 most important lessons that I think people ought to know in order to create and live their best life. And then there was a fourth book that called Coach Yourself for Success. And this book, by the way, is available if your listeners go to my website, which is brianbartes.com. And there will be a box that pops up to sign up for my newsletter. And if they sign up for the newsletter, Scott, then they actually get the PDF version of Coach Yourself for Success for free. They can certainly go on to Amazon and pay $20 or however much it is on Amazon for the hard copy, but they can get the PDF of Coach Yourself for Success for free. And the reason I wrote that book was and you remember me now saying a couple times about wanting to add value to people. I know that not everyone is going to hire a coach. I think there's value in coaching for everyone. The people who achieve at the highest levels, every single one of them have at least a coach and probably multiple coaches. There's definitely value in that. But some people won't do that, and that's okay. That's a choice. And I wanted to be able to add value to them and help them to do something that looks like coaching. And so I wrote this book very simple book called Coach Yourself for Success. And it's a sort of a stairway to success. It's 10 exercises, 10 steps that people can take to design and live the life of their dreams. And again, that's available for free. So even if you have no interest or don't want to look at the other books, at least go and grab that one for free. And there's definitely value there. And maybe that'll help you to become interested in other things that we're doing.
Again, Brian, quite an achievement. And appreciate that offer to the listeners. And again, I would emphasize going to brianbartes.com and checking out the full content. Since, Brian, you've listened to a few of my interview episodes, you may know the way I usually conclude the episode is by asking the guests what kind of music you're listening to and what are some of your favorite bands.
Yeah, I like almost all music. I really enjoy music. I played a couple different instruments growing up. I started playing the French horn and played saxophone more than any other instrument. I played the oboe a little bit, but played saxophone in a wind ensemble and jazz bands and concert bands. And so I love music. I love classic rock is sort of my go-to. I listen to a fair amount of country, sort of the country / rock, more of the modern country, the island country. These country singers who write books about, or write songs rather, about being on islands and what that island life is like. But I like jazz, classical, listen to a little bit of opera. I'm not super big on like hip hop or some of the more esoteric or alternative stuff. But for me, my go-to. So when I run, you mentioned running, or maybe we talked about that, I think, before the show.
We did.
Interest in running. I'm a runner, and when I run outside, I don't listen to music. I don't listen to anything. But when I run on a treadmill, I either watch something so that I can sort of multitask. I'll watch a podcast or watch now I'm watching basketball games during March Madness or ESPN. But I also listen to music. And my go-to music, a couple bands that I really like. I like U2. I like Dave Matthews Band. I've been a big fan of Dave Matthews Band for a long time. I like just classic rock. I like Guns N' Roses, AC/DC. So that's probably my go-to, certainly for running. More than anything, I don't listen to a lot of music, and I don't listen to a lot of news. I do listen to a fair number of podcasts, and so that's generally what I'm listening to if I'm in the car. Or, but again, that treadmill running, I like to have some upbeat, positive music, and either somebody like Kenny Chesney or again, U2 or Guns N' Roses usually fits that bill.
Good running songs indeed. Brian, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo, and certainly your insights. Is there any last piece or pieces of advice for my listeners?
Well, I would say just go out there every day and be intentional. We are on this planet for a reason, and if you don't know what it is or aren't quite sure about that, then try to figure out what that is, and then live with, to use your word, Scott, live with purpose, live with intentionality. The last chapter of my book, Life Lessons, is titled "Make Each Day Your Masterpiece." And so I want to challenge the days and the weeks and the months and the years go by so quickly. And again, I'm thinking about death a little bit recently, because more than I normally do, because of circumstances. But whether it's in my father, by the way, was 92, so he lived a really good, active, intentional life. And some of us will get to live until we're 92, and some of us aren't going to be around very much longer. But however much time we have left, I'm just going to challenge. And by the way, I'm saying this to myself, and I'm saying it to you, Scott, but I'm going to challenge your listeners to wake up every day and make each day your masterpiece.
And that is certainly great advice to end on. Thank you very much, Brian.
Scott, thanks so much for having me on the show. It's been an honor, and I've enjoyed getting to know you and learning more about you and about your podcast. And hopefully I've added value to you and your listeners today.
Thank you again to Brian Bartes for his valuable coaching advice and insight for this episode. If you like this series and or past episodes, please hit or follow the subscribe button on your listening platform. As I always say, this podcast can only grow through your support. And keep those show ideas coming, or if you have a series idea, I would definitely like to hear that too. You can always follow me at catelloscott@gmail.com. So where do we go from here? Well, as for my next episode, which you won't want to miss, I have the pleasure of introducing my new favorite nerd. You heard that right. I am very pleased and excited to interview Beth Z. Beth is an artificial intelligence guru that will help us cut through all the noise to bring us all productivity tips and tricks utilizing AI for everyday work and life. Till next time.